Welcome to another episode of Don't Waste the Chaos. I'm so excited to be bringing back one of my top rated guests today. We are talking sales and empathy, two topics we all need to focus on regardless of our roles in business. So I'm pumped to jump in. The last time I had this individual on the show, we talked about what to look for in a loan officer when you're purchasing a home, some things you probably didn't know about real estate agents, and the ins and outs of how to purchase a home when you're a business owner with a unique financial situation. He brought the value then and is super helpful, but this person has so many interesting things about him that I could literally have him be a guest on the pod 7 or 8 more times, and we'd just be scratching the surface. On top of that, this individual is extremely private, and you won't hear any of what you're going to hear from him today, even if you're in his friend group, unless you pry. So I'm very grateful he's open to sharing with me and my listeners today. Now, let me spit out some unique things about our guest that you may or may not know, whether you listened to the last episode featuring him or not. Terry Roberts was a homeless teen, a teenage dad, and a teenage husband. He went on to spend 10 years in the United States Marine Corps and has quite a few bars and ribbons to show for it. He has worked in the gun industry and then made his foray into the finance industry, where he has come to stay and he's found his home. He's got a very unique background in process improvement, including some activity with the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award, with a portion of his career, actually almost a decade, focused on quality assurance and training. He's taking a very unique approach to sales. And so I want to jump in today and focus on 2 things with him, and that is sales and empathy. Now, I have exciting news. Terry has made a recent career change that's pretty major, and it has not been announced. So you're going to hear it first today here, folks. But what is more than this announcement is I want him to talk about why he got into the sales in the first place, considering the personality that he has. Now, I'm somebody who has worked in human resources for over 20 years, and I have reviewed and rated behavioral and personality assessments for over 2 decades. I've seen thousands of assessments, and this individual is not someone I would typically place in a sales capacity. Terry is a technical expert. He's the person who wants to know everything inside and out, and I wouldn't call him necessarily a relationship builder or an over communicator. I wouldn't call him an entertainer, and I wouldn't call him the host with the most, which typically is what a lot of our sales professionals are. So Terry, considering what I just said about your personality, first, is this an accurate assessment?
I would say it's spot on, and I love you for loving me through it.
Yes, amen to that. So second, why did you get into sales in the first place?
Sales and empathy are definitely 2 things that I would say are not my strong suit. I think that most people who know me well would agree with me when saying that. But the main reason that I got into sales, not realizing what the reason was when I did it, was very much related to my transition from the Marine Corps to the civilian sector. And when I say civilian sector, I'm not in any way meaning to demean civilians. That's the term that military service members and veterans use. When they transition, it's military service to the civilian sector. And civilian sector, primarily on the professional side, my whole time in the Marine Corps, I learned really early on in the process of boot camp that if I understood what the expectations were and I could at the very least meet those expectations, I would 100% of the time get what was the result of meeting those expectations. If I could exceed those expectations 100% of the time, I would know what I would get in return for exceeding those expectations. It was very objective. It was very black and white. And that's the grid that I've thought through my whole life. And I appreciated it. So that's how and why I became very successful in the military, because I figured that out and I was willing and able to pursue those objectives, knowing beyond the shadow of a doubt what was going to be on the other side after I accomplished them. And then when I got out of the military and went to the civilian sector, I did the same thing. Only difference was I kind of I convinced myself what the reward would be for excelling at every single task that I was given by my supervisor or the owner of the company. I thought that if I tried as hard as I did in the military, in the civilian sector, even though they didn't tell me what was on the other side, it would be there for me. They would surprise me with it. And it wasn't necessarily recognition or money. It was the feeling of accomplishment and having something, even if it just meant more responsibility, it would be something greater than what I was actually realizing after I had been so successful and far exceeding the expectations of the responsibilities that any of my superiors were given to me. And so it was a salary job. And the salary job I was given, you look at a job description, it's got the duties and responsibility. I saw those. And then I told myself, well, if I was to write this job description in a way that I could I could perform better at these roles and responsibilities than anybody else with this job title, that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to expect something in return. So I would convince myself of what that would be. And usually that would be some sort of a promotion, getting more responsibility. And sometimes that would happen, but I felt like it was a punch in the face whenever it happened, because what I was getting in return for what I was getting from the company, the organization, my superiors, in return for the effort that I was providing, it was not balanced with respect to my expectations. And it made me furious because I didn't see it as fair. And I know that life's not fair, but I didn't appreciate it. And it actually caused me to go into a downward spiral to the point where it was affecting my professional relationships. And I took it personal. And after about 8 years of doing the traditional job salary role, I saw an opportunity to make a move into sales, and not realizing the reason that I was attracted to sales was that I had control over my own destiny.
Gosh, what a freaking good answer. And you guys, Terry and I have been friends for over 16 years because we were colleagues. We actually met at work. I met him fresh out of the Marine Corps. And that really just couldn't be any more accurate of a depiction of what I watched as I was the HR manager at the time, what I watched as your journey was. Gosh, that's taken, I know, a lot of hard self-reflection for you. And I love the way you sum that up, because hopefully, if there's any military personnel listening, that should be very inspiring. It's going to be like frustrating too, as it was frustrating to you, but inspiring that there are careers out there that you can find. So I appreciate that response. And yeah, that was deep. So let's talk about your specific journey in sales. So where did you start in sales, and what has been your path? And I know you don't normally talk about this, but let's just be honest. You are a top producer. You have been targeted for a decade plus from organizations wanting you to come and sell for them or be sales leaders for them. And so you're a multi-millionaire. You have been huge in sales, but you've only been doing this for a little over a decade. What's been the path like? What was your entrance and kind of where you're at now?
Well, it might not seem like an organized response, so I'm just going to talk. So when I made the move over to sales, I didn't really see it as sales, but it made me really nervous because I knew that I didn't want to be a salesperson. I had no interest in it. And I don't like I don't like putting forth effort to convince somebody to do something that I want them to do or that they might not want to do. That's not me. I don't care about that. If I feel like there's some commonalities and we can go off of that and I can at least help you, then I think the sky is the limit at that point. So I don't actually look at it as sales. What attracted me to sales was I think of people in two categories. There's a people person and then there's a process person, a people person mindset and a process person mindset. And I am I would say 99.9% process minded and 0.1% people minded. And we'll talk about that later, I guess, with empathy and all of that good stuff. But I figured out that in life, there's a process to every single thing that we do. And if you think, or the way that I think is through a grid of a process is just a set of interrelated activities that transforms an input to an output. And that makes everything objective for me. So when I'm leading people towards a common mission, it's objective. And when it comes to counseling people, when it comes to rewarding people, when it comes to performing good or bad, when it comes to innovating, when it comes to driving our son to school, there's a process to it. And whenever you look at life as a process, at least for me, I can look at those little bitty interrelated activities that transforms the input to the output. And when I focus on learning each one of those interrelated activities to the point where I feel like I've mastered them individually and then connecting them, then I can look at ways to make it better. And if you just say, I want to get better at sales, and then that's the approach that you take, it's never going to happen. You have to dissect what it is that you're doing and figure out what you're good at, what you're not so good at in each one of those interrelated activities, and focus on mastering all of them. And then you will gradually get better at whatever you're doing. And that's how I look at sales. And that's a big part of why I've been able to be very successful at sales without actually being the stereotypical salesperson mindset.
Yeah, that's so true. And folks, he's going to write a book someday. He's already started it. We'll get him to, so that way he can help you with it too. But so let's say one of our listeners wants to get into sales, but has more of your type of personality, or maybe even they have the traditional sales personality. Where do you think they should start? And what would you recommend they start with? And this will probably talk a little bit more about your journey. Should they start with a place that supplies them with leads? Should they start with a place that they have to find their own leads? What does that look like? Who thrives best in each of the environments?
I would say it's going to take some deep soul searching and figuring out, like, where do you sit financially? Can you afford a 12-month, a 24-month, a 36-month lead time before you actually start generating money from your sales? And is it in an industry that you're passionate about? And if the answer is yes to both of those questions, then absolutely go down that avenue. But if you're not financially able to go months or potentially years without really making the income that you need, then find a sales organization that's willing to invest in you and teach you how to sell, teach you how to learn about the product that it is that you're selling, so that you could figure out and have the time without feeling rushed to really understand and master those interrelated activities that's transforming your inputs, which is a lead, a client of some sort before they're a client, to a closed deal, which can set some salespeople apart. To me, I don't look at a closed deal as when the check is signed. I look at a closed deal. I look at all of my deals as open, because even after the transaction is complete, I want to maintain that relationship with that client, no matter how difficult it was to work with that client. I want that client to have nothing but good things to say about me later down the road, because at that point, it's just free, ongoing, organic marketing.
Look at that relationship growth there. Yeah. So talk to us about, you went through the 100% commission path. And I would say, that scared your wife to death, but ended up being extremely lucrative. So obviously there's base plus variable comp, there's full commission. Talk to us about why you chose the path that you did, and essentially like why you would recommend somebody would or wouldn't do the same.
So at this point, I got out of the Marine Corps in 2006. And when I made the leap from an executive level position, I had a salary. I was making $200,000 a year as a salary. It was guaranteed as an executive. And I made the move to go 100% commission because I had two options. I could go the salary route as a salesperson with much less commission on top of it, because you've got the guarantee. It's all really going to be a risk versus reward. And how much are you willing to bet on yourself is what it boils down to. And for me, I'm not a gambler. I have no desire to do it. The only time I'll ever gamble is when I'm certain that I'm going to win. And that's not really gambling. And in this case, I was kind of ahead of my peers making that same transition, because I had a few years of looking at what salespeople were doing with that company from a very strong process perspective. And I did that naturally because that's just the way that I think. So I understood the process. The hardest part for me was studying and trying to master the study process so that I could actually get my license. But the reason I went to 100% commission route is because I was confident. I didn't see it as a chance. I felt confident enough to bet on myself and know that I was going to be successful. And because of that, I was going to make way more money spending the 40 hours a week away from my family. And that's how I look at things professionally, is when I'm working, that's time away from my family. So my time away from my family, I'm going to do absolutely everything I can to maximize the value that I can create for myself and for my client in that 40-hour work week or 20-hour or whatever it is. And that wasn't going to happen if I would have done the base comp salary plus commission. It came out to where it was around twice the income that I would make going 100% commission. So the income was higher. To me, the risk was not really, it didn't seem that much higher because I felt really confident about what I needed to do. And because I dove into it that way, there's one thing in looking at a process and mapping it. There's another thing actually executing the process. It's a completely different world. And that's when you start to figure out and learn everything that you didn't know. And when you're dealing with live people in the sales organization, in the sales process, and they're leaning on you, especially in the home buying journey, you can't mess it up. There's people, that have all of their stuff in a moving truck. And if you mess it up and their loan gets denied, they're literally homeless and it's all your fault. So I would just say when you get into that, if you take that approach, whether it's 100% commission or it's a decent salary plus, take it slow and don't let your clients suffer because you're trying to take on so much so quick so you could make more money sooner.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just for a frame of reference, so these conversations originated over 13 years ago for us because I was pregnant with my son the first time Terry talked about getting into sales. And I was pregnant and I was scared to death. Now I own my own business and generate all of my own sales and all of that. So I look at it very differently. But at the time, especially being pregnant, and, we had a couple of other kids that we were paying child support for. And, we just weren't in the best position financially, but we were working on it. And it just seemed too risky to me. And the interesting thing is it seemed risky for Terry not to do it. In his mind, it seemed too risky, in my opinion, for him to do it. So we pressed pause. He got a big pay increase because he had told the company that he was at that he was going to leave. So they increased his pay. And I have seen this happen over and over again with organizations. When you match someone's pay or increase it, most of the time that person's still going to leave. You've only just pressed pause on them leaving because most of the time that person's thinking, you should have paid me this from the beginning. You don't really value me. I'm still getting out of here, but I'll take your money for a minute. And that's essentially where we were at. And when he circled back around it, we were on a mission trip. I don't know, T, it was like a year or two later. I guess Keegan was probably like 2. So it was a couple of years later. And he was like, are you ready now? Like, can I do it now? And gave me essentially a lot of the information that he's given you all today. And I was just like, I guess do it. Just go try and do it. And good grief, now he's been doing it for over 11 years. And we would be in a completely different situation if he hadn't done it. So I'm so thrilled, but it is a leap. I recognize that. But if you bet on yourself, just like what he said, then it's probably because you have something to believe in with yourself and you know what you're capable of and you can go deliver. So I want to move on from this topic, but I'm not going to until you tell the folks. So you started in sales and you started in an organization that was providing you with leads. Why have you moved on? And what has been your journey and where are you at now? Tell the people the deets.
So the company that I started in sales with, I was a W-2 employee and I was 100% commission and I did really well. And it was a great company that in general, just a great company. It's a great mission. The clientele because of the clientele, it gave me the opportunity as a veteran to talk with veterans every day. And I couldn't do that otherwise with where we lived in Columbia. And the more I learned, the more opportunity I saw. And the more opportunity I saw, as I was seeing that opportunity open up for me, the bigger the company was growing. And I like to do things a little bit differently than a lot of people. And the way that I like to do things isn't necessarily scalable for a company that has 5,000 employees where, potentially 1,100 of those employees, 900 of those employees are in the same job that I am. I like my custom approach and it works for me. And I think it works for my clients. I've got thousands of client reviews that validate that for me, and that's part of what keeps me going. But as the company grew and as I got better at the process, I I continued to look at that process as those interrelated activities. And there were a lot of those interrelated activities that I didn't have control over. So because I didn't have control over those, I felt like I couldn't do anything to improve those. And if I did, I would get in trouble for it. Not because it was unethical. It was just one of many reasons that I would get my hands slapped. And so that was the beginning of me trying to figure out, well, how can I put myself in a situation where I can stay in this industry, stay on the sales side, but be able to have more control over those interrelated activities so I could make it better for me and my client. And we all win a higher percentage of the time. I can convert more. The way that I look at it is if I can convert a higher percentage of my clients, then they're going to benefit because I see myself as far superior to a lot of my competition. And I think a lot of good salespeople should look at themselves that way. And if they don't, again, they need to have some soul searching and try and figure out why. And if they're okay with being mediocre, are they really okay with providing mediocre service to the client that's paying them? And to me, that answer should always be no. I don't think that's okay. So I saw more and more opportunity and continued to get my hands slapped for things that I was doing that were not scalable or for whatever reason. So I made the move from one organization to another that did give me more liberty, a lot more liberty. But the more I learned about how that organization's process or lack thereof would allow me to continue innovating those interrelated activities within the process, I realized really quick that the time that I was spending, so the biggest difference between my first company and the second company was the first company gave me all the business. They charged me for it, but they fed me the business. I didn't have to spend time generating my own business. I didn't have to go to community events. I didn't have to spend marketing and advertising dollars of my own to go out and have veterans call me to do loans for them. And when I made the move to the other company, I had to generate all of my own business. But again, I was betting on myself and I was confident that I could generate my own business because I was already doing that with the first company. And I was convinced that the first company didn't appreciate the effort that I was putting forth to generate that business. Just like what I said a few minutes ago, the effort that I was putting forth, I was at the very least expecting for the company to seek me out and figure out how and what I was doing so that they could share that with everybody else. I was number one in the company of 800 other loan officers doing the same thing that I was doing as a loan officer. But I was number one out of all of those by far in my second or third year as a loan officer, competing with loan officers that have been doing the job for 8, 10, 12 years at generating my own business. So I did it a few more years and realized I don't have to be here. I can generate my own business. And if not, I'll figure it out because at that point, it's my fault. If I can't, I don't have anybody else to blame. That's why I made that move. And then when I made that move, I started generating all of my own business, 100% of my own business and 100% commission. And as I was generating that business, then I realized the products that I was generating my business for that I was wanting to sell, the needs of the business that I was generating, I couldn't meet because of the products at the organization or lack thereof. So my conversion for those clients was about the same as my conversion for my clients at the company that was sending me leads. And we all know, any decent salesperson should know absolute fact that if you generate your own business, and that's organic business, that should always convert at a higher pace, a higher rate than random web leads where it's as close to cold calling as you could get. Well, what I discovered was even though I did convert very well with leads, my conversion rate with my self-generated business was about the same. That's terrible. And when I started digging into it and realized the reason that the conversion is low was because of the products and the terms that I was allowed to offer was not competitive. I saw that as a continued waste of time. And so I moved on and became an independent broker where I am finally self-employed, which has been a lifelong dream. And now my conversion is going to be much higher because there's not there's not a product out there that I can't offer. There's not a rate out there that I could be beat by. Now it's 100% within my control, again, for me to innovate those interrelated activities so that I could maximize that conversion and get my clients the type of loan, the type of product that they're after at a very competitive rate with service that can be unmatched.
And I am here to ride that rocket ship with you. That is very exciting. And what I'm hearing you say from just a general sales perspective, outside of finance and mortgage, is it doesn't mean you're not a good salesperson if your conversion is low, if you're selling a crap product. And you didn't call it a crap product, but that's like what I'm hearing you say is if it's something that you either don't believe in or isn't what your clients need or want, or isn't the top opportunity for a client, it's going to be really hard for you to do good with that, even if you are a talented sales individual. And so I would just challenge my folks, by the way, we're all in sales. It doesn't matter if you're an HR pro listening to me right now, you're recruiting, you're selling the company, we're all in sales. If you are a parent, you're in sales, because I'm selling to my 12-year-old boy, trying to get him to do what I want all of the time. We're all in sales. And this is just a message for us to take into consideration. How do we get to the desired end result that we want? For us, it's financial freedom and essentially early retirement, or the option for early retirement. We're both probably just going to work forever because we love working, but we want to do fulfilling work. And I think that was really helpful, what you shared about that sales journey and kind of how you thought through it. And I'm hoping that there's some people right now listening and thinking, okay, maybe I need to make a move, or that's why I wasn't successful in this other role. It doesn't mean that I'm not a successful salesperson. So hopefully that was motivating and inspiring to others. Terry, before we move on to diving a little bit deeper into the nitty-gritty of empathy, anything else you want to add about the sales aspect?
For those of you that are in sales and you feel like you're in a slump and it's just not going well, take a look at yourself. Don't blame the company. It's not necessarily the company's fault. Something I learned actually pretty recently, and unfortunately it took me a long time to realize this, was if that's the case for you, or let's say your company lets you go, or if you just decide to go to another company in the same job, don't take that personal. Don't let that slow you down. That in no way means that you are a failure. It doesn't in any way mean that you're a bad person. It just means that at that time, it's not a good fit. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But what I would say definitely not to do is sit in the same job, whatever it is, and be upset and be poisonous in your organization and not do anything about it. Like, take responsibility and some initiative and go for it. Figure it out how to get better. And if it doesn't work there, go somewhere else. If that doesn't work, then go out and do it on your own. And if you're not to the point to where you're not willing to make that move from a W-2 job, but you're not willing to bet on yourself, chances are it's you and it's not the company.
Gosh, that'll preach, coming from a person who's moved roles every 4 to 5 years, sometimes on my own accord, sometimes because I was told I wasn't wanted anymore. So yeah, that's so true. Everybody says that life is short and you're going to thrive somewhere. And you might even thrive somewhere for a couple of years and then start to not thrive, and it's time to pivot. So that's really, really good perspective. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so many of us struggle with empathy. This is something that I hear very regularly. I see it all over HR publications that I read. I witness it with business leaders, peers, and colleagues nearly every single day in my consulting business. We are, in general, an impatient, unempathetic people in a lot of our moments. And that's just in general. That's all of us. Now, you specifically have a unique situation, and that you are not just someone who struggles with moments lacking empathy. You actually have a clinical diagnosis passed down from a psychotherapist explaining your issues with empathy. Now, this is a diagnosis that I had personally never heard of before, and I have never heard anyone else ever diagnosed with it since. I'm sure there's other people out there with it, just haven't connected. So I know this is a little bit deeper than you usually go with people. So I appreciate you either forcing yourself to get comfortable to go here with it or humoring me, but let's talk a little bit more about it. So, what we're talking about, we're going to talk in general for any of us that struggle with empathy, and that's pretty much all of us at any given time. But Terry's going to speak about it through the lens of someone with alexithymia, and we'll go deeper into that. But what are some of the qualities or traits that a person experiences leading up to a diagnosis? And most specifically, and while I know you might not want to share the exact details, it might make you uncomfortable, but what kind of trauma are we talking about that leads up to a diagnosis of alexithymia? What is it?
Alexithymia is something that I'd never heard of until recently, as in the last, I don't know, I think it was 3 or 5 years.
5 years.
And I don't know what the clinical definition is, but my understanding is it's the inability to recognize emotions in other people, or in yourself. And it's a strange deal. I'm told it's not necessarily a disease. It's not something that can't be cured, but it takes a lot of effort to overcome it. So the example I give, and it's not exaggerating at all, is it's very possible for me to have a loved one on their deathbed right in front of me, and me not be able to, I won't feel anything. It won't be sad, it won't be mad, it won't be any emotion whatsoever. It's a neutral, I say a neutral emotion, but it's not, I don't think of it even as an emotion. It's an existence, I guess. It's an observation that I'm making. And so my challenge is thinking to myself in a scenario like that. That's an extreme scenario, but in a scenario like that, I have to tell myself that in this type of a situation, a normal person would feel sad. They would feel potentially horrified. And I have to list these emotions out to myself. And then I have to try and tell my mind to make myself feel what I think that emotion would be.
Yeah. Wow. And how did you get here, do you think, when you were talking to the physician about it? What causes this, or how does this happen with a person?
It really is different for everybody. I attribute a big part of it to the military. It's no fault of the military. It's actually a compliment to the military, if anything, because if you think about the United States military, the armed forces, especially the Marine Corps, Marine Corps is going to be 250 years old here in 2 years. That's 250 years with virtually unlimited money and resources that the government has invested into the Marine Corps to train recruits to become Marines. And then after they become Marines, the training does not stop. It's there the whole time that you're active duty. And the training, it starts out and it feels intense. And just like anything else, you adapt to that training to the point to where what you're doing is second nature. Everything that you've been trained on, literally everything that you've been trained on, you've been trained so well for so long that is what you do. And Marines take that so seriously to the point to where that's why you hear about so many of these Medal of Honor recipients that jump on a grenade because of their training.
Yeah.
They don't think twice about it. That's really good training. And when you get out of the service, you still have that ability to exercise what you've been trained and have no regard for emotion. And it doesn't even seem like it's an ability. It's just, that's the way that it is. And so when you're in the service, your training is about protection. And typically it's going to be physical protection or the pursuit of physical protection. And when you get into the civilian sector, like your need isn't there for you to be physically protective. And for me, it was, without realizing it, I had to figure out something to protect. And one of the things I think was my emotions, which is why it's hard to emotionally relate or recognize what I'm feeling. Like being able to talk about it and be emotional now is not common.
Yeah, you've come a long way in that regard. And I'm so grateful that you're putting in the work, but I appreciate you sharing that because I know that's still very, very hard for you to do. And yeah, I'll share a little story that just kind of illustrates. So actually, when he was, and I agree, it's a disease, or it's not a disease, it's a diagnosis. So it's something that can be worked on because I've seen huge growth in this area. But just as an example, when he was diagnosed with this, my mom happened to be in a hospital in another state. And she had an undiagnosed kidney stone. It had turned septic, and we were losing her. She was in the ICU and for days, and it was a really hard situation. I'm very close to my parents. That's why Terry and I moved out to this farm to be close to my parents. So, spoiler alert, my mom lived. But through that process, I was in some of the darkest days of my life. And I remember I stepped out to my car to take a phone call. Service was bad in the ICU. And T was back at home with our child at the time, who was a little guy. And we get on the phone, and I think I'm getting ready to pour out everything that I'm experiencing. I've just been holding it all in. I am the leader of my family in a lot of ways, and I'm so ready to talk about it. But I asked, how was your appointment at the VA? And he started telling me that that day actually was the day that he was like educated on this. And the physician had shared with him that this is a clinical diagnosis and, something to be worked on. And we had the call, and we wrapped it up. After a while, we were probably on the call for 10 or 15 minutes. And then I asked him if he needed anything from me. And we got off the phone, and I started laughing out loud because it was such an illustration of alexithymia that I was dealing with like some of the hardest moments of my life, really close to losing my mother. But he was sharing this complex situation with me and really trying to process it and grasp it. And we never even talked about my mom or how I was feeling. And honestly, it ended up being a blessing because I was emotionally overwhelmed anyway, but it just made me laugh in that moment because I thought, yes, I'm so glad that we're learning about this because this makes sense. I think most wives in that situation would have been like, what the hell? Like, how did we not talk about the major issue that we're dealing with? But it just helped shed some light on some things in our relationship that made sense. It actually helped me in a lot of ways to be like, it doesn't mean I'm not loved. It doesn't mean that he doesn't care. It's just something that he struggles with, that he's having to make a ton of effort to make an impact on. So it's huge. It caused me to have a little more empathy, or a lot more empathy really for you, to think like, gosh, this isn't the way he wants to be. So a lot of people struggle with empathy, and whether it's a clinical diagnosis or not, like most people aren't trying to be jerks. And so sharing this kind of stuff with each other is so important. So knowing you, it's not just a struggle, it's part of this mental and emotional makeup, whether it's been from your childhood. I mentioned that you experienced homelessness as a teenager. There's a lot there. And then your military career. You've got a lot there. What are some of the things that you do to relate with people, to connect with people with intentionality?
There really aren't many things. I'm not one to pursue new relationships. I don't have an interest in that. I value the relationships that I have. I'm probably not very good at showing how much I value the relationships, but I do. I guess new relationships that I'm wanting to start, love language for me that I use to show love is usually it's through actions. It's not through words. So that's how I do it, is trying to help somebody do something for them that I think is of value for them rather than talking about it. Just like the time when I made the farmhouse table for you. It took 3 or 4 months to do. For me, it was easier and more, I thought, more sincere and more comfortable for me to spend all of that time making that than sitting and looking at you 5 days in a row in the eye and telling you how much I love you and why and everything that I know that you want to hear.
Yeah. When in reality, we couldn't afford a restoration hardware table anyway. So that was the only way I was going to get it, is if you were going to take the time and the elbow grease to put that together. So yes, we still have that table today. So how has this impacted your professional and personal relationships? And what have you learned over the years in that area?
Learned in the area as far as having empathy and relating to people.
Yeah.
Or,
Like Through the process, I guess I would say, one of the things I was thinking about when I was, thinking through questions that I would ask you today is, I got to watch you as a friend. And then, later on down the road, we started a romantic relationship. And I watched you in a relationship with a person who just had no grace for you whatsoever. Instead of digging in and saying, like, this is a good man that has this struggle. I don't know what the struggle is. I don't really understand it, but it's obviously a struggle because he's a good man. I'm going to give him grace and figure it out. You were with a person that was like literally middle fingers, bro, can't handle the way you are or whatever. So I feel like I've watched you be really good about choosing people in your path that have like maybe more high emotional intelligence or confidence, because those people aren't going to seek the same things from you. So I've seen you be successful in your personal relationships in that way. You really guard your heart. You're really selective with friends. You're very selective with what you share, even though your wife is forcing you to talk about uncomfortable things on a podcast. Like, you're very intentional in that area. Professionally, when you're kind of forced to work with a person, forced to work with a client, they're not like people that you get to pick and choose. How do you handle those situations, and like, what have you learned?
I think it goes back to your original intro was something about a technical expert. So I'll try and win them over, earning trust by sharing what I know and how I can leverage what I know to help them achieve what they're after. It's not relational at all. In fact, it probably makes it even harder for me to be in the sales industry. Like, if I have a client and something goes wrong, the second that I am convinced that they think that they're going to dictate to me what I'm going to do, I think that emotionally intelligent people who are empathetic would quickly realize where that's coming from emotionally from that client and try and relate to them. And I want to tell them to go F themselves, and I don't. But my way around that is I need time to force myself to think through the process and try and figure out why they're coming at me the way that they are. And then by the time I talk to them, and most of my transactions are over the phone, but if it's in person, they have no idea that I have that mindset. And that's kind of like it's just an ongoing self-imposed challenge of mine, is to, while I'm thinking this, and I'm very adamant and convinced that what I'm thinking is correct based on how they're coming at me, I'm going to make them feel like I'm the coolest, calmest, most collected salesperson that's going to help get them through it so that they can ultimately accomplish what they sought my services for in the first place.
Yeah, what a power play and what a strength really to hone. That's maturity right there that a lot of people don't have access to. So,
It takes me longer though, because it takes, for me, it takes a lot more effort discipline too, to even want to try and think about where they're coming from. Cause I'm just thinking about, they can just go somewhere else and get a way lower level of service and pay even more for it. And so it just takes me time to regroup and respond in a way that is impressive.
yeah. What role do you think your faith plays in this?
It's a very large role, if not, it's the core of it. It's the foundation of it. And the more consistent I am in daily devotionals or reading scripture, the easier the days are every single time, no matter what happens in that day. And the hardest part is just being in the word on a daily basis, having the discipline to do that. And even when you are in it, the second you close that book, it could be a challenge. That could be a complete distraction to make you forget everything the time that you just spent in your faith and growing it. But it's it's to the point to where it is a foundation. So I can, most of the time, my public reactions, and by public, it's not necessarily, jumping on a stage in front of everybody. It's being in front of somebody, how I would respond to a challenging situation or adversity most of the time. And hopefully I can continue to grow that. So if it's most of the time, say it's 70%, I can make it 71 or 72. I can't imagine that any of us could ever reach 100%. Then we would be called Jesus if we did that. But my goal is to challenge myself so that my public responses, my public behavior is a reflection of the foundation of my faith.
Mm. Yeah. And I can say your private behavior is too. You probably don't give yourself enough credit.
To
So
me, it's just as important, if not more important, because other people see it. And if for anybody, if you can respond in a way, I call it positive confusion, if you can respond in a way that's opposite of what people expect you to respond, even though you're justified in responding that way, they're going to want to learn more about you. They're going to want to know why you did that. And that opens up the door and opportunity to share the reason is because of your faith.
yeah, absolutely. That's the goal. So anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners before we wrap today?
You mentioned a little while ago about a book. It's something that's been in the back of my mind for a while. I haven't made a whole lot of progress, but I like sharing the premise of the book, which is probably going to be titled something to the effect of Busting the Ties. And the ties are symbolic of railroad ties. And the reason is because it's an analogy of a railroad, and the two rails are parallel 100% of the time. Otherwise, it's not it's not going to serve the purpose. The rails have to be parallel. And a lot of people, if not everybody, look at one rail as an identity, their identity, and one rail as their role. And when you look at yourself in those two perspectives, but you look at it as if those rails are tied together by those railroad ties, that means if you flip the railroad on the x axis, it's going sideways. And that signifies your ups and downs in life, when you succeed and when you fail. And you're tying your role, which is what you're succeeding and failing at, whether it's a professional athlete, a service member, a Marine, a parent, a spouse, a retiree, a successful CEO, the list goes on. It's for everybody. Everybody has a role. Everybody has multiple roles, and everybody in every single role will fluctuate between your peaks and your troughs, your successes and your failures. But the scary part about it is, because you look at and tie your role to your identity, when you fail in your role, it's easy to perceive yourself as a failure, and that's not true. And when you do, catastrophic things can happen, especially if it leads to another role that you're failing in and another role that you're failing in. So you're in multiple roles that you're failing in, and you're convincing yourself that as your identity, you're a failure. That's a really scary place to be at in life. And if you don't have a really good support system of people around you to remind you that that's not the case, it's going to be scary. It's going to be dangerous. So the book is about the difference between your role and your identity. And your identity is stable. It's you. It's who you are at your heart and soul. And your role is fluctuating. It's up and down. But as long as you can remind yourself and or have a support system around you to help you remember that your identity is consistent from the day that you're born to the day that you die, when you fail at a role, you don't see yourself as a failure. You see yourself as an opportunity to succeed again. Same thing as when you do succeed in a role, you don't treat people differently because of how successful you are, because you're not any better. You're the same person. Your identity is consistent. So that's the premise of the book. And I have made very little progress on it, but I really hope to get it published sooner than later.
You will. I have no doubt you will. All right. Anything else you want to add?
That's it.
Okay. Well, listeners, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Don't Waste the Chaos. We talked about sales, which to a lot of people feels like chaos, but to us has felt like building generational wealth. We've talked about empathy and the struggles, whether you've got a diagnosis or not, the struggles that all of us have around that area and how we can improve based on our personal experience. Emotions can be chaos, but learning from them and growing from them causes us to thrive in the midst of chaos, which is what we want for us and for each of you. Until next time.